Even though yes and no are some of the first words we learn as kids, sexual violence is pervasive, especially in college. The problem isn't about misunderstanding yes and no. It's about a culture of inequity that needs to change. All of us, whether we're aware of it, know someone directly impacted by assault. I'm reevaluating the role universities play in this problem, because a conversation about consent can transform institutions and prevent future trauma. I think there's a really awesome tradition of activism around these issues that's been going on for a while. And it gets organized around these two mantras: yes means yes and no means no. And the idea is both that we should take what other people want seriously, and that enthusiasm should be a standard for any kind of closeness between people. And those chants that have organized so much activism are super important. And I think we're also at a moment where we can have a more complex conversation, right, where we can kind of raise the ethical standard beyond, do you understand what these words mean? Since that's not ultimately the problem. It's a problem of power and inequity. So focusing just on, do you know what yes means, or do you know what no means? That's not really the issue. I look at how everyday interactions scale up to become patterns that get organized, that become sedimented in institutions. And I also look the other direction at how the patterns in institutions impact everyday interactions. And I get to use theoretical tools from communication studies to help me think about that. At a lot of universities in the US right now, there are reporting policies for what people have to do when someone talks about an experience that they've had of violence. And that kind of pattern at the institution that's sedimented in policy means that if my first instinct might be to empathize with a person or offer up support, that I also at the same time, if I'm a reporter, have to then pull in this bureaucratic process at the same time. And for folks who are maybe still building their skills around how to engage with people who've experienced trauma, figuring out how to do both of those things, empathize, support, and play this role of a reporter, could be really challenging. So this is kind of that policy level, or the pattern in the organization, filtering down and impacting an everyday interaction, one that might be really crucial, since we know that how people respond when people talk about violence is extremely impactful on their health and well-being. You know, I think some folks end up being pretty surprised or shocked at how pervasive the problem is. So we know that in college, about 1 in 5 women experience some kind of sexual assault. We know that for LGBTQ folks, that it's somewhere around more than half are experiencing this problem in college. Men experience a lot of sexual violence too, 1 in 6 over the course of their lifetime, usually before they turn 18. And so they'll come to college having already experienced something like this. And that means that all of us, right, whether we know it or not, are impacted by this problem in some way. Right? We all know somebody who's experienced sexual violence, even though we might not be aware of it. And so those residual traumas impact our relationships. We might not even know it, but they do. And so this is really a problem that all of us are touching every day and might not know it. When I was in college, I was close to a number of people my first year, and by the end of college, I learned that 3 of my 8 closest friends had been assaulted, and that was devastating to see the impact on them. And some of us tried to address the problem within the college, and it really didn't work. This was before some of the policies and case laws that have kind of come out since then, and it made me interested in how things could change. We had meetings with administrators, and we talked to faculty who we thought were sympathetic. We kind of tried to gather documentation about what was happening and present that to people who we thought could make some change, like who had the power to make decisions that would shift things. And we kind of, met with people who were, I think, sympathetic, but there just wasn't the kind of momentum to make a broad change or to really impact things that were to really impact the university in a way that was going to change things. In my book, Beyond the Rapist, I'm arguing that we need to shift from focusing just on individual perpetrators to systems. So it's really important to hold perpetrators, people who are assaulting or raping, accountable. That's really crucial. And also, organizations need to think in a more encompassing way about the processes that teach that person to be a perpetrator, about the systems that actually support perpetration. And those are embedded in institutions, and particularly in higher education in the United States. So Beyond the Rapist is a way to think past individuals towards the organizations and systems that are supporting and perpetuating sexual violence. One of the things that my research has shown is that the people who end up doing the work of reporting and responding to these incidents are also the people who are most marginalized and minoritized on the campus. So white women end up doing this work more. Men and women and all kinds of people of color end up doing this work more. LGBTQ people on campuses end up doing this work more of reporting. So even in the response to sexual violence, there's inequity on the basis of difference, where some people are doing different kinds of labor that might lead to exhaustion or burnout, or lead those folks to encounter risks and retaliation and pushback. And that's part of a problem that pushes people out of education. It's an issue of access. Right? So sexual violence is an issue of access and pushes people out. And then the systems we're using to respond end up building on some of those problems and replicating them. I do two kinds of consultations. One is a consultation where an individual will contact me when they're trying to think about how to navigate within an institution to get change to happen. And so I'll talk with them about what options they might have and what kinds of obstacles they might encounter and what kinds of risks go along with the different options they might have to create change. The second kind of consultation I do is more when an organization comes to me looking for advice, less an individual. And in those consultations, I really am helping or whatever organization it is to shift from thinking about products to processes. Right? So rather than thinking about how do we get this policy language right, I think about what are the kinds of skills and habits that everyone in the organization needs to cultivate in order to change what's happening at every level. The problems that are coming up there are very much the problems that society is facing right now. Right? There have been a lot of incidents recently where we'll see very powerful individuals pushed out of their organizations, and that's really important for accountability. And also, the risk is that it could lead people to think that if we just push out the bad apples, we'll solve the problem, and that won't work. So when we start to think as individuals or as communities or organizations about this isn't just a couple people who are bad, right? That's not what the issue is, that all of us are implicated in this, that all of us are impacted by the issue in some way, and so we're actually all part of the problem in some way. That's pretty uncomfortable to sit with that way of thinking about the problem. And so there's a lot of pushback on that. Right? Individuals push back on that. We see kind of social retaliation happen. We see people kind of not believing what's actually going on, and sometimes that's a protective mechanism to not think that, there's this really bad stuff happening, right? If I don't believe it, then I don't have to acknowledge things are really tough sometimes. So all of those kinds of processes come up when I'm working with organizations or when I'm doing this research. Right? It's really hard to start from a place of acknowledging that stuff has gone really wrong. Right? It's easier if we just kind of pretend that it hasn't. When I'm talking with my students in particular about this problem, I'll talk about other ways that we learn and get better at things. Many of my students have experiences on sports teams or in athletics where it's pretty clear that to get better at something, you have to practice it a lot. And if you go to a really hard practice for some kind of athletic event, you often walk away and you're sore and you're tired. You might even have some bruises or discomfort. But actually, that discomfort is the signal that you're getting better and building skill. And it's similar in terms of sexual violence, that acknowledging it is really uncomfortable for organizations and for individuals. But that making that acknowledgement, right, kind of sitting in that discomfort, is actually the signal that something is changing. It can sometimes seem so much a part of the fabric of everyday life that it doesn't seem abnormal. And so when I'm talking with my students about this, I'll often describe magic eye photos. So magic eyes were super popular in the 90s, and there's kind of a mess of colors and shapes when you first look at it. And if you know how to look at it in a very particular way, you can end up seeing a 3D image that emerges. Right? But if you don't know how to look at it, it just looks like color. So if you're sitting beside somebody who knows how to see it and they say, there's a bird in this picture, you're thinking, you're crazy. What are you talking about? This is a mess of colors. There's no bird here. And that metaphor where we're able to, two people look at the same thing and notice very different things, or actually one person not be able to notice something that's there. And that's part of what's going on with violence, where some folks haven't learned to acknowledge it and see it and notice that it's there yet. The thing that drives me in my work overall is a love of learning. So I think that faculty life is just a really cool place because you're constantly encountering new ideas and new ways of thinking about problems, and that really fuels me. I think on this problem that is so challenging, have to kind of have a sense of faith that things do change and can change, and that those changes are likely long-term. Right? That these changes that my research is connected to and that other folks are working on too probably won't happen tomorrow, but that this is a small piece of a broader change, and kind of keeping that in mind is, I think, a way to be engaged in this kind of work. This fall, I have a fellowship through the Institute for Advanced Studies here at University of Minnesota, and I'm working on my next book project. So I was a faculty member at University of Missouri before I came to Minnesota, and in the fall of 2015, there were very nationally visible protests on the campus. It's about a little over an hour from Ferguson, Missouri, where Darren Wilson murdered Michael Brown. And there was a lot of organizing that happened on the campus that eventually led to the resignation of the university system president. So I'm interested in the relationship between violence and the organization there at the university, and what universities might learn from what happened there, and what ways we might need to reorganize higher education.